We see here in the picture a little hint of the story of Cain and Abel. Both of them presented a generous offering to the Lord on a particular day, and yet one of the boys did it God's way, and the other boy didn't, and that turned out to be a mistake. And it all had to do with offerings. Again, we're going to review this verse that was read a few minutes ago, at least part of it, where God says, "Bring all the tithes into the storehouse, all the tithes into the storehouse, so there will be enough food in my temple." This is from the NLT. "If you do, says the Lord of heaven's armies, I will open the windows of heaven for you. I will pour out a blessing so great you won't have enough room to take it in. Try it. Put me to the test. Your crops will be abundant, for I will guard them from insects and disease. Your grapes will not fall from the vine before they are ripe, says the Lord of heaven's armies. Then all nations will call you blessed, for your land will be such a delight, says the Lord of heaven's armies." What a beautiful promise. You know, there's also a curse mentioned in that verse just before this, but I didn't put that in. I wanted to focus on the positive today as I presented this message. So if we do it God's way, we're doing fine. Now, I want to tell you a story. This happened, I won't say where, because I don't want to identify the person. But as some of you have found out, that I have a habit of showing up unannounced at your doorstep. And this may be disconcerting to a few, but now that you know me a little better, you can... And I may not come to your home if you're a faithful member, because I'm trying to reach out to the inactive members, mostly, and to the shut-ins and others like that. And sometime I might just say, well, I'd like to get to know this family a little better, and so I come and I knock on your door. And don't worry about how your house is, or whether your beds are made, or your everything's a mess. I'm not a house inspector. I'm here to talk about God's love to you. Okay? So I showed up at this house one evening, and I saw something in the living room that I never expected. It was right at the time when these great big TVs came out, okay? So this is a few years ago. And I was a little disconcerted. I wasn't courageous enough or brave enough to say what I really felt in my heart. But this particular family, and this is back, you know, when something is new and it comes out, it's very costly. Very expensive. And I happen to know that this family was thousands of dollars behind on their school account, because I was a member of the school board of this particular place. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my word, don't these people understand, you know, that we should pay our debts first before we go getting in further debt and getting an instrument like that? And worse yet, they were all glued to this TV program that they shouldn't have been watching anyway when I came. Be sure your TV's off when I come. I haven't had that happen yet here, so you're fine. So I was really shocked. Really shocked. I'm saying to myself, people, what are you thinking? Well, anyway, enough of that. Do you know the story of Sister Betsy? Sister Betsy. Back in the very earliest years of our denomination, they had no plan for the support of the ministers. None whatever. Minister would feel God's calling. Of course, back then they didn't have seminaries and things like that, or they probably did, but our pastors didn't back then go to those things. Most of them were of other faiths anyway. And so pastors did not have any fixed remuneration. They just accepted whatever the people took up for a collection on that particular Sabbath. Well, that wasn't going so well, and it was really hard. And so the following plan was recommended at the January 1859 meeting in Battle Creek. Number one, let each brother from 18 to 60 years of age lay by him in store on the first day of each week from 5 to 25 cents. How's that? Why did they say the first day of the week? Because that was that text in Corinthians that talked about laying up your offering on the first day of the week have it ready for the following Sabbath. Each sister from 18 to 60 years of age lay by her in store on the first day of each week from 2 to 10 cents. Also let each brother and sister lay by him or her in store on the first day of each week from 1 to 5 cents on each and every $100 of property they possessed. Now, for $100 you could buy quite a bit of property back in 1859. And so this plan was adopted by the General Conference, and they called it systematic benevolence. Benevolence. Benevolence is being a benefactor. And it was systematic because they had certain rules here. Now, they didn't take into account exactly a person's status, financial status, but they had 5 to 25 cents, 2 to 10 cents, etc. So there was a range there. Well, that seemed to work for a while, and then it was modified, and regular tithing, as we know it today, was introduced shortly after when they learned about God's tithing plan. So there are some basic principles that we want to share with you this morning, and the first one is trust in God. And our closing hymn is going to be Trust and Obey. Trust and obey. How much do you trust the Lord? Do you really trust the Lord enough to open up your heart, open up your pocketbook, and give as you should to the Lord's work? By the way, talking about money is a deeply, deeply spiritual issue. Sometimes people will criticize a pastor for preaching on stewardship, and they'll say, all you preach about is money. I haven't done that, have I? I think this is the first time in all of my time here since the 1st of February, and it's probably the only time, but I think it's a necessary thing, and I think we need to be reminded from time to time about this. It's a deeply spiritual issue, and you can see how that is in that family that I described earlier about the big TV. There was something spiritually wrong about their thinking. And they needed somebody to talk to them about that. And it was a little awkward at that moment. I just didn't feel like I should. Maybe I should have. Maybe I should have dismissed the children, turned the TV off, and talked to the parents. I really should have. As I look back, I think about that. Well, here's some very interesting statistics. On this graph, the bigger part of it toward the bottom right is a graph of how Americans spend their money, mostly on housing, going from that green bar, a vertical bar on the right, over to the left, and so on. And then on the very left part are some figures from the Adventist Church. Now this was in the review. I took this out of the review, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, and it showed some other figures. So in a particular year, in a year that was recent to this chart, regarding the tithe, an average annual tithe for an Adventist was $811. Now that's pretty low, really, because that means that those families collectively only earned $8,000 in a year. So that was pretty low. But then you factor in that there's about 2.6 persons per each household, and then it does get a little better that way. And I'll show you how that works in case of Williamsport. And that in the middle one you have the local church giving, and at the bottom one you have mission offering. And this is the one that is really shocking. Really shocking. $20 a year for mission offerings? That is really bad. Our mission offerings years ago used to be really high. Back in the early days, some of you probably don't remember back that far, but it was much stronger. So what about our church? I did some figuring, and here's what the figures brought to us. Current membership 390. Our tithe last year was $633,000 collectively. That figures to an annual tithe per baptized member of $1,625. However, factoring in the average 2.6 people per household, it becomes 4,000. So that's closer. That's closer because the median income in Washington County is $58,000, in Berkeley County $59,000. I think most of you live in either of those counties. So that gives you a rough idea. So really, it looks to me like the people of the Williamsport Church are pretty faithful. And by the way, when my son was going to get married a few years ago, he said he aspired to be the typical father of 2.5 children. I don't know how that worked, but now he has 3 girls. So, so here are these figures, and I think this is a very. I think it speaks well of Williamsport, but I think we can all reflect on our own situation. I'm going to give you more help on this as we go through here. So there's trust in God. The second principle is honesty. Now, I had an experience in Brazil several years ago. I did a lot of traveling through the state of Santa Catarina, which means St. Catherine in English. In southern Brazil, I was a youth director for the conference and other hats that I wore. And I did a lot of automobile traveling all over the state to different churches and preaching and giving seminars and so on. And so on one particular day I needed gas and I pulled into this truck stop. And there was when I had put my gas in and I went in to pay, there was this other person in front of me and he was a trucker. And I kind of caught part of the conversation. As he was getting ready to pay, the clerk was making out his receipt by hand. They didn't have, this was back in the 70s, okay? They didn't have too many electronic things back then. And so the guy at the cashier, couldn't think of that word for a minute, the cashier asked the trucker, "How much do you want me to write on this receipt?" Now, some of you are figuring this out, aren't you? There was some padding going on here. This man would buy his gas for X amount, but he'd get a receipt for Y amount. He would turn the receipt in back to his office, wherever it is, and he would get more back than he actually paid. And the cashier also would get a cut of that. That is so dishonest, so dishonest. But things like that go on all the time, and I'm sure they do here in this country as well. And it's pretty sad commentary on our society. There's a lot of transactions that take place in cash that are never reported to the government for income tax, and this type of thing. A lot of that stuff happens, and it's really sad. Another principle is ownership. We trust in God, honesty, ownership. And here's the verse in the Psalms. God says, "For all the animals of the forest are mine, and I own the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know every bird on the mountains, and all the animals of the field are mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for all the world is mine, and everything in it." Some of you may remember this book by Morris Venton called God Says, But What? I Think. God Says, But I Think. It's a wonderful book. Really, really nice, and it was printed in 1993, so it's been around a while, and he's deceased now. But he's commenting here on a parable in the Bible, a parable that Jesus told about the pearl of great price. And then he actualizes it or makes it more contemporary. He says, some Christians think the story means we are the pearls and Christ had to give up everything to redeem us. But we understand rather that He is the pearl of great price. We are the merchants seeking for happiness, for security, for eternity. But when we find Jesus, it costs us everything. He has happiness, joy, peace, healing, security, eternity, everything. So we say, I want this pearl. How much is it? Well, the seller says it's very expensive. But how much, we ask? A very large amount. Do you think I could buy it? Oh, of course. Everyone can buy it. But didn't you say it was very expensive? Yes. Well, how much is it? Everything you have, says the seller. We make up our minds, all right, we'll buy it. We say, what do we do next? He says, what do you have? He wants to know. He says, let's write it down. Well, I have $10,000 in the bank. By the way, I have $1 million bill here if you'd like to see it. Found it at a yard sale yesterday. Good, $10,000. What else? That's all. That's all I have. Nothing more? Well, I have a few dollars here in my pocket. How much? We start digging. Let's see, 30, 40, 60, 80, 100, $120. That's fine. What else do you have? Oh, nothing. That's it. Where do you live? He's still probing. In my house. Yes, I do have a house. The house too, he says. He writes it down. You mean I'll have to live in my camper? You have a camper? That too. What else? I guess I'll have to sleep in my car. You have a car? 2 of them? Both become mine. Both cars. What else? Well, you already have my money, my house, my camper, my cars. What more do you want? Are you alone in this world? No, I have a wife and 2 children. Oh yes, your wife and children too. What else? I have nothing left. I am alone now. Suddenly the seller exclaims, oh, I almost forgot. You too. Everything becomes mine. Wife, children, house, money, cars, and you too. Then he goes on. Now listen. I will allow you to use all these things for the time being, but don't forget, they're mine, just as you are. And whenever I need any of them, you will give them, because now I am the owner. Isn't that amazing? Beautiful story. So there's trust in God, honesty, ownership, and then something I want to call truth in tithing. Truth in tithing. First question, how much money of our money belongs to God? All of it. Not just 10%, it all belongs to Him. How much do we return to God? 10%. That's why we never say pay tithe. We cannot pay something that's not even ours. It's His. So we simply return it to Him. Okay? And then we add offerings as God has prospered us. Now, I'm going to be realistic. We know about putting kids through school, just like any other family, going through hard times. We've been there. When I was living in Michigan, at one point we had 2 girls in college, 1 girl in academy, and a boy in church school. So I know that sometimes tithe is about all you can do during those years. Or sometimes there's medical emergencies or other circumstances that happen. But the tithe is basic and is required. Now, what I want to do here, is that pretty visible? Okay. I want to explain this tithe envelope to you. And notice that the man's name is John Median. Median because I gave you the median figures for the 2 counties here. So John Median, he's filling out his tithe envelope probably on a Friday to bring it to church and put it in the offering. And so he is calculating. And so his income, as you see at the bottom on the right, is $48.55 a month. He's got a good job, good paying job, and so that's his basic salary. And so his tithe, of course, will be $485.50. Now, John has his kids all are done. They're been through school. They're married off, and they have their own families now. So it's just John and Mary Median, and so they are now, and their house is practically paid for, or maybe it is paid for. So now they're going to be generous to the local church as well. So for the local church budget, they're going to put in a couple hundred. And of course on the left here, the left part of the tithe envelope explains every part of this, the tithe, the church budget, the Chesapeake, and the world budget. And world budget is what we used to call the mission offering. And of course the Sabbath school takes up an offering, but most generally not a whole lot comes in there. We're better off putting it all on the tithe envelope. We get our receipt at the end of the period, probably at the end of the year, that summarizes all of this. And so John's check that he puts in this envelope is $835. Now this might sound very, very high to some people, and it probably does. But we're talking here ideals, okay? I'm not measuring anybody. Only God can do that. I have no idea what your circumstances are like. But I suggest that you take some of these envelopes home with you. Always take some home with you and keep them with your bills, so that when you are doing your financial thing, however you do it, monthly, weekly, whatever, you remember the Lord. It's a very good reminder to have this with you. Now, I told you that we have these 4 children. And I'm coming down to the climax of this message, which is the story of God's miracle car. This picture was taken in Brazil, and we were missionaries there. But before Brazil, we were missionaries in the little country of Uruguay, which is down below Brazil and above Argentina. And Uruguay is, the whole country is probably 1/3 bigger than the state of Ohio. So it's a rather small country. And it's very cosmopolitan, very European. A lot of the inhabitants came from Spain, Russia. I know some from Armenia, Yugoslavia. They took in immigrants a lot from Europe, especially during the First and Second World War. So these are our kids. Way over on the right is Barbara in the orange sweater. She's the oldest. She's in her mid-50s. She has a husband and 3 children. The oldest child has just finished college, and she's got others all the way down. And she's a Spanish teacher in a high school up in Massachusetts. The middle girl in the yellow is Tammy. She's single, and she works at risk management in the GC building. And Michelle is on the left with the brown sweater, and she and her husband live in Michigan. They have a boat business along Lake Michigan, and a boy and a girl. And then Ricky, the one who said he wanted to be the average father of 2.5 children, is the little one there. He was born in South America. And it's really interesting. So I wrote this story up for the Insight magazine, and this is a picture of the cover. And this story occurred in 1973, but the story came out in the Insight about 72, 73, no, 76, 77, somewhere in that range. So here's what happened. So here's a map of South America, and I'm going to put some arrows on here. So we were about to have our furlough. We were in Uruguay. I was a departmental leader there in the country of Uruguay, but we were being transferred to Brazil in 1973. We were started in 70, so this was in 73 when this happened. We were living in the capital city of Montevideo, and we got this call that we were going to be transferred, but the GC, or maybe I should say the South American division, was going to send us back to the U.S. for a 3-month furlough and to study Portuguese. Now we were speaking Spanish, now we were changing to Portuguese. So we packed up our household goods. We put them in storage there in the city of Montevideo in a building that was owned by Adventists. And we began our trip home. So on the way home, we first stopped in southern Brazil at our new place of work to kind of get a feel for it, to just spend a few days there getting the lay of the land, so to speak, and looking for housing and all that sort of thing. So we spent a few days there. We routed our tickets so that we could first stop and see our new assignment and place of residence. And the tickets that the division bought for us were a complete round trip because it was cheaper that way. So it was going to happen that when we came back, we would stop up above in the city of Florianopolis, and we wouldn't need these extra tickets from Florianopolis back to Montevideo. They would just be sitting around, I guess, till they eventually expired. But anyway, we had them. So we went over to Bolivia to visit some friends of ours that were living over there, and we got to see Lake Titicaca and Machu Picchu and some of those things. And then we went home. And we had our furlough, and we studied Portuguese at American University in D.C. And then came the time to come back. Now, we had set aside some money for a car. We had no car. And this is where God's miracle car comes in. We had set aside some money. It wasn't quite enough, but we knew that we were going to be getting a settlement package from the division, resettlement or moving allowance, however you want to call it. And we knew that that money, put together with what we already had, would be exactly what we needed for the particular car that we wanted. And we had in mind, since we now had 4 children, a little Volkswagen station wagon, which was very, very prominent down there in Brazil at the time. And so we came back 3 months later by way of São Paulo because there was an Adventist VW dealer there. So we stopped, we knew how much money we had to work with, and we ordered the car that we wanted, the little station wagon, and then we went down finally back to the town of, or the city of Florianopolis. I was there just last January again to enjoy my old place when I took my trip to Brazil. So we flew to Florianopolis to begin working and to wait to hear about our new car. So the car was on order. And we were waiting, and we were waiting, and we were waiting, and we thought it would take only a couple of weeks, but it kept being delayed. We didn't know why, but we were going to find out really, really soon. So we were basically camping out in our apartment in Florianopolis with our 4 kids and borrowed furniture and dishes and so on, because our stuff was still down in Montevideo, all right? So the division had purchased us round-trip tickets, never imagining that we might need them later. The car that we ordered from the dealer in São Paulo was delayed just long enough, as it turned out. A letter from Uruguay, I've got to back up here. Meanwhile, that money came through, the settlement package came through, and I cashed the check and put the money in my desk drawer in my office there and locked it. And it was there for 2 or 3 days, and I got to thinking, wait a minute, is this tithable? Should I have paid tithe on this money? And I tried to dismiss it out of my mind, and I couldn't. I couldn't. The Holy Spirit was working on me, and I said, oh my. If I turn in the tithe for this money, I will not have enough for the car. I will be very short by I don't know how many dollars. Wasn't dollars, but you know. And so I really wrestled with that for a couple of days. Finally, I decided that was it. I'm going to return the tithe and just leave it in the Lord's hands. And that was about maybe 11:30 in the morning on this particular day. So I pulled out the money, I put it in a tithe envelope, I took it over to the mission treasurer's office, and I left it with him. That was in the morning. We lived on the mission compound. I went across the parking lot to our apartment, went up to our apartment, and my first wife and I, Vera, we had a prayer. We didn't know what we were going to do now. It would be very embarrassing to tell that dealer in São Paulo that we couldn't buy the car. We just didn't know what to do. Well, here's what happened. When I got back to the office, the mail boy came in with a letter, and the letter was from an American missionary in Montevideo who had just arrived there while we were on our furlough up in the States. So this letter arrived from Uruguay, and this pastor, he said, Jim, he says, we came down here from Brazil with a Brazilian car. We thought we could maybe just drive it out of the country and bring it back in every 6 months so that we wouldn't have to pay the terrible, duty on it to have it become legal in Uruguay. So he said, we have this car, and would we be interested? That's what the letter said. Now you have to realize that letter from Uruguay to Brazil probably took at least a week and a half to get there because of the international thing. But the fact that that letter arrived just hours after I turned in the tithe is amazing, amazing. And the car that was offered to us in the letter was the exact car that we wanted, and the asking price was equal to what we had left. Amen. Absolutely amazing. The timing and how the Lord had this, plus the factor that we already had unused tickets to fly from Florianopolis down to Montevideo, about 800 miles. So we said yes. I placed an international call, or maybe I did it on my ham radio, I don't know, because he had a license too. So we flew to Montevideo, we bought the car, we visited friends and family, because yes, Vera had relatives, distant relatives in Montevideo who were Yugoslavian like her, and we got to know them while we were living down. It was amazing how everything worked out. We piled our car, crammed as many things as we could, pots and pans and dishes and blankets and whatever we could fit in there, and we drove back to Florianopolis, 779 miles. And when we got to the border, and the border guards saw all this stuff piled on top of the car and in the car and 4 kids, and we just wondered how I think they just threw up their hands and waved us through. It was pretty amazing. So that is what happened. We did that, and then we drove back, and the money we saved was 3 times the tithe that we returned. Now, if this isn't the Lord, I don't know what it is. Here's our kids with the car, and beautiful little car. It served us very, very well for a few years. And I don't know, no one will ever be able to convince me that tithe is not real. No one will ever convince me. Oh, by the way, would you like to know who the missionary was in Montevideo? Charles Griffin. The Hoffers and the Griffins have been friends for like 46 years, 45 or something like that. So the Lord says, "Test me in this," says the Lord Almighty, "and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it." Brother and sister, if you're not currently tithing, you need to do it. You need to find a way. Even if you do 1% this month, 2% next month, work up to it, however you need to do it, to get that into your thinking, and the Lord will definitely bless you. Abel did it God's way, and he was blessed.